Ready graphics? Ready theme? Cue graphics.
Good evening. For your information tonight.
Again, talk about the insecurity of an actor. Charlie was terrified the whole first year that he was going to be fired. He didn't know how good he was. I mean, one of the things that I always remember Diane saying is, when you're writing a script, I should be able to cover the name and know who's saying this.
Hi, I'm Lauren Milberger.
And I'm Jessie Mullins.
And this is part 2 of our interview with Stephen Peterman.
Yes, here on FYI, the Murphy Brown podcast.
Thank you for that.
Hopefully you listened to part 1.
Please go back and listen to part 1.
Because I promise you we're probably going to reference something we said earlier, and we were not thinking ahead that this would be 2 parts.
No, we were lucky enough to have more time with Stephen than we thought we would.
It was great, and we want twice the amount next time. So.
Yes, and so we didn't want to say, oh, you know what, your time is up. Mm-hmm. He was a writer on the show, as well as eventually became the executive producer with his writing partner, Gary Donzig.
Mm-hmm. We hope you enjoy this one. Please let us know what you think about these interviews, and if you want more of them, because we plan on doing more.
Yeah.
You can find us on social media at Murphy Brown Pod, website murphybrownpod.com. Or you can email us at murphybrownpod@gmail.com.
I'm really excited about the rest of this interview. Yes. You're going to have some really great stories, we promise.
Yes, please enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.
We would love to hear the story of your transition from acting to writing.
Yes. That's something that's very, very intriguing to us and unique in this group in particular.
Well, I mean, more people are doing it, but I'd always loved writing, but it's very hard, as you may know. I still don't like it a lot, but I like it when it's like jumping into very cold water, you know. It's really hard to jump in. The first blank page, it's freezing. It's freezing water, and I stand by the edge of the pool for a while. I had friends from acting school in New York who had come out here and started writing, and they would say to me, "You're smart and you're funny. You should do this." And I thought about it, and I tried to write alone, and that didn't come to anything. I tried to write with my roommate in New York, who was still one of my best friends, but we were so much alike that it was not a good partnership, because we both contributed the same things, and when we got stuck, we were stuck on the same things and couldn't help each other. So that didn't work. Then I meet Gary down in San Diego doing a play at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, doing Misalliance. Gary is, as I mentioned, Gary is gay. There is a certain gay club at the Old Globe, which me and one other and the only other straight actor in the company felt like we're not part of the party. We can't get into this group. There's definitely a feeling of we're on the outside. And that actor was Gregory Itzin, who became President Logan on 24, and is an absolutely wonderful actor and one of my dearest, oldest friends out here. But Greg and I hung out together. We also found out we'd grown up 20 miles away from each other in Wisconsin, and so we became best buddies down there, and Gary was part of his group, and we didn't have that much contact with each other. But when we got back to LA, Gary and I would often run into each other. We belonged to the same gym, and as an actor, you spend a lot of time filling your days going to the gym. And I would bump into Gary at the gym, and we'd chat a little bit. But one day I came back from a particularly miserable audition. I had done pilots. I had done short orders, 6 episodes that looked like it was going to be a hit that didn't come to anything. I was always like this far away from success. I was on the first season of Square Pegs, and then that show got canceled. I did a bunch of series. I was on Paper Chase for 2 years as a recurring guest and never made the regular cast. It kept getting close, but I wasn't getting there. And I slowly but surely began to get beaten down by it. And I found myself at a place where I was auditioning for my agents had said to me, there's a great part on Hill Street Blues. It runs, he's in all 4 acts of the episode. I said, okay, I'll do it. So I go to the audition. I see 20 guys just like me. And you guys will understand this. You say you look at the part, and he does appear in all 4 acts. In the first act, he says, "Phone call for you, Captain." In the second act, he says, "I think it's on your desk." In the third act, he says, "Who wants coffee?" I mean, it was like that. And I walked out of there like, what the am I doing? I'm too talented. I'm too smart. I went to college. And I go to the gym to work off my frustration, and I run into Gary, and we talk, and I say, I'm sick of this. It's stupid. I'm thinking about writing. And Gary immediately says, that's weird. I've been thinking about writing too. We should get together and knock some ideas around. And I think to myself, I have nothing in common with this guy. I don't want to waste an hour and a half with him. And I say, oh, yeah, we should do that. Oh, my machine's open. Great seeing you. I'll talk to you later. And I go work out. That night, Gary called me at home. He still to this day doesn't quite understand exactly why he did it. Because he said later, I wasn't thinking about writing, but I'm an actor and you said it, so I'm competitive. So I said, yeah, I mean, it was coming up on regional theater casting time, and Gary had done a lot of regional theater, and he did not want to go out of town for 5 months again and leave his significant other. And so he called me, because one of the things that my spiritual guru, Gary, always has said is, when you say yes, something's going to happen. It may not be exactly what you expected, but something is going to happen. You're nudging each other like this is something new. Okay. When you say no, nothing happens, right? And I'm always the one who, to protect myself, would say no. So Gary calls me and he says, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? You want to come over? And I've told this story to so many people, but it is true. I paused because I was so surprised that he had called, and I was so surprised that he had asked, that I paused that little millisecond too long, where I knew if I say I can't make it, because of that pause, he's going to know I'm lying. I'm stuck. So I said, sure, okay, I'll come over tomorrow. And I hung up the phone and I turned to my wife, who was the only one earning money in the house at that time. And I said, well, I'm going to go piss away an hour and a half at Gary Donzig's tomorrow. And she said, well, you're not doing anything else tomorrow, are you? And you can't go to the gym 2 days in a row because I know you said you have to rest your muscles. So why don't you go? She's a wonderful partner, and we've been together for 42 years now. 42 years. So I went to Gary's, and we sat down together, and because we are different enough, and yet we're both Jewish kids, we both have interesting relationships with our families, we're both emotional in our own ways, we connected in a way that I would never have predicted. And within an hour, we had an idea for an episode of Family Ties, which became our first spec script. We connected in a wonderful way that to this day, I love him like a brother. I love working with him. I love his neuroses. I love what he contributes to our writing. And we worked together. Now, everybody has their different ways, but you talked about our writing being character driven. It's because as actors, that's how Gary and I approach stuff. And I think it's how you guys do, right? We would sit side by side at the computer and we would act it out. Unlike some teams where somebody fights because they fight to take control of the keyboard, we would fight to avoid the keyboard. I always wanted to be as far away from the keyboard as possible. I was usually in a corner of the room because, as I said to you before, I always felt like every script at a certain point was absolute crap. And Gary was the one who would always say, just put something down. Just put something down. We'll make it better. Because I was always like, no, let's work on that first sentence. Let's work on that first quarter of a page for like 2 months. So we would improvise everything, and we always needed it to be the emotional track had to be A to B to C. You had to write it in a way that as an actor you knew, I can act this. If someone's having trouble acting it, I can tell them how to get there. And it was really a very exciting thing when we started working, and other writers would find out that we had been actors. They would invariably, we would have people come up to and say, okay, you were an actor. When they come up to you and they say this, what does it mean? What are they talking about? There'd be this huge kind of abyss between the writers and the actors. And I loved being down on the stage and working, seeing them. One of the big joys for me and one of the big surprises for me was that I loved acting when it was good, obviously, but it was frequently difficult or hard, so hard getting the job. What was fun for me was to see actors like Grant Shaud and Charlie Kimbrough and all these guys, Joe Regalbuto and Eldon, particularly, these guys who could take your words and they could make your good stuff even better than you had heard it in your head. And they could take your mezza stuff and they could make it really good. And to be able to see you put something down on paper and somebody else deliver it and get that response from the audience, get that laugh from the audience, or get that emotional thing from that was a big treat. But yes, for years, Gary and I felt, I think, more me than him, like we're just actors playing writers. It took a long time to feel like a writer.
Did the Emmy help?
No, as a fact, and I'll tell you why. This is the wisdom of age. The night is great. I mean, when you win, although then you have to go up there and you feel like an idiot up there, and it's always terrifying. But first of all, you get the Emmy, and you do your little interviews, and then you come back and you're at your seat and you're holding an Emmy. But you're holding it, and everybody sees, oh, you got an Emmy, and everybody congratulating you. And then you walk to the governor's ball or whatever, and you're holding your Emmy, and people are, hey, good for you. And then you put down your Emmy at the table, and you go to get a drink, and you're just another schmuck at the party. So it's something that unless you're carrying it around, it's like, you're just that guy who was there without it. And then here's the other thing. You get an Emmy for something you wrote a year ago. The day after we won the Emmy and we were back at the office, we're in the middle of a script that once again was like, what the f- are we doing with this thing? Oh, this is a disaster. And we're getting people calling, congratulating us. And it's like, I've got no time for that. I've got a script that doesn't work. And I remember we brought the Emmys to the office because everybody at the staff obviously wanted to see them. I got the Emmy on the desk and I'm screaming at the Emmy, why? I won you last night. Why is this script so bad?
To fix it.
You fix the script.
It's like the ultimate imposter syndrome. It's like you guys would take this back if you knew what was right in front of me right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, in hindsight, it's kind of cool. And the show won while I was on. The show won 3 times while I was involved. 3 times, twice as best show. So all the producers got one. And then Gary and I won once for writing. So we have 3. And at one point, my mom said, it's so wonderful, but 3 is kind of unbalanced. Can I have one? So my mom has one on a pedestal in her living room in Milwaukee, and her friends. I mean, years ago, it's so long ago. They're all tired of it, but they used to hold it up and give fake speeches. So it's nice for that.
Now, since your scripts are so character-driven, were there any particular guest stars that you really enjoyed writing for outside the regular cast?
We got such wonderful people. Because of you guys, I am now just watching shows that I haven't looked at in 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And I will have more reminiscences for you at some future point if you are willing to have me back on.
Absolutely.
But
Yes.
I can tell you, I've just watched from the first season, or the first couple seasons. I watched. I could have danced all, or should have danced all night. It's the first one that we got on the air. We actually wrote one that was a Frank-centered episode. That was our first thing we wrote, and it never got shot. It was, I think, one of the only scripts in the first season that got kind of. And this is another point where Gary and I thought, well, we're going to get fired. We're the only one of the, everybody else's first script got done. Ours isn't. Diane gave us some reason. I think, I'm not sure how good the script is because I can't remember it, but I have a feeling it was a little too Frank-centric. And in the early episodes, they were really focusing on Murphy. And I think they may have pulled it for that reason. Then the first one we got on the air was I Would Have Danced All Night. And I watched it because of you guys. And I think I told you in the email, it is, for me, an barely adequate first effort. I find it predictable, schmaltzy in a way. I think we may have been, I think that we may still have been at that point where we were trying to make sure Murphy's likable. So, the scene at the end where she goes to the apartment of Murray Brown. Murray was played by a sweetheart named Lou Wills. Lou Wills had been this eccentric dancer, an acrobatic dancer on Broadway. Lou was married to Beverly Dixon, right? Okay, does Corby tell you this stuff? Right. And was a fixture with her every week. And so it was really sweet and fun to have Lou do the show. But the scene where she goes to the apartment and, she wants her tickets back, but they're so excited about going, and she has her change of heart. It was it's kind of predictable in a way, but it was one of those things where it's like, oh, good for Murphy. She does the right thing. I look at it. There's some fun runs in it. Miles and his date is good. I watching it again. I loved Corky's Faith Ford's thing where she says to Murphy, "Oh, Murphy, oh my God, it must be so hard. I mean, I've always been, you're on the A list. I've always been the B, but to have been there and fall."
One of our favorite.
I love that. I think that's very funny.
Yeah.
I think the little Jim Dial throwaway about having hosted the inaugural parade with Valerie Bertinelli and the fact that she's matured is just a great Jim Dial kind of viewpoint. But it's not my favorite by any means. Gary had a wonderful theory that I think it was a self-protective thing, but that when you look at the great series, you remember it. You remember maybe five episodes a season, 6 episodes if you're really lucky that are great. And then there are some that are pretty good, and then there are some that are good, and then there are a few that are clunkers. That to me is not one of my favorites. But then I watched the one with Buck Henry as the genius. And that is when we began to hit our stride, and that was a really fun episode to get Buck Henry on the show.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Which was so cool, and Candace loved it because obviously she and Buck knew each other, and it was Candace early on was a little insecure about doing television. She was always worried about what her friends in the movie business would think, and until the show became what it became. But to have Buck on the show was really great for her. And he, watching that episode, the way he threw himself into it and into that character was so much fun. And everybody had fun stuff to do in that episode. I enjoyed watching that one a lot.
Do you have any favorite episodes that you've written?
I'm going to. I'll eventually, in our next one, I'll give you again, because Corby has a memory that is so phenomenal.
It's unbelievable.
And we apologize because since she's the first person we talked to, we assumed that everyone's memory must be that way.
She's a fountain of knowledge.
So whatever
Corby
you can think.
is a miracle of nature. Corby was my sanity. Corby was Diane's secret weapon. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell that Diane could have done that show without her. She is one of my dearest friends. Now we're going out to dinner again. We go out to dinner regularly, and I love her to death. She remembers so much, and she remembers things that I wrote, and I'm saying, I don't know if I wrote that. I mean, she's not you. I remember when you pitched her. But I will tell you some of the ones I do know for sure. Obviously, Come Out, as I've told you, is a personal favorite. The Christmas episode that we actually won our Emmy for is one of my favorites because, again, how much time do you guys have? I feel like I've been talking forever.
No. We want all the time that you want to give us.
All the time.
All right. Well, I'll tell you the story behind the Christmas episode, Jingle Hell. Because this is, again, the shows that come out of real life, always the best stories. The first year on the show, like a lot of shows, you're working like crazy. You're exhausted. And as you approach Christmas, all you want to do is get to the Christmas break and have a few days off. Everybody's exhausted. Everybody's behind. And you have to buy gifts for each other. Because everybody gets gifts. And it's like you wind up getting these stupid pen and pencil sets. And I still, on my desk right now, I've got a little golf ball clock from Tiffany's. It's a stupid thing. It's impossible to get a battery in it, but I've kept it for all these years because it was one of the gifts. But you wind up with exhausted. All you want to do is see your family, and you got to run out and buy these stupid presents for people that nobody, pen and pencil sets, those little gravity ball things that click, click, click that drive people crazy, and they put in a box somewhere. So the second year of the show, we're approaching Christmas, and Gary says, look, we all have so much more than we deserve. We don't need presents. We don't want to go out and buy presents for each other. Why don't we just find 3 charities that, run a gamut, and everybody on staff and all the cast and crew, everybody can contribute to those instead of buying gifts for each other. And everybody says, oh my God, Gary, that's fabulous. That's great. It's a great idea. Let's do it. So we picked 3 charities. Everybody's giving. It's so easy. It's so good. We all feel better. We're able to work. We're able to go home. We don't have to go run around and go to Tiffany's and look for stupid stuff. And then Barnett Kellman, our Jewish director, sees Candace sneak into her trailer with a couple of shopping bags. And Barnett confronts Candace in her trailer. What's in a shopping bag? And she says, they're for my hair and makeup person. I mean, they work so hard, and I have to give them something. And Barnett said, you can't do this. We made a deal. Everybody's supposed to do this deal. How's it going to look? You're buying presents, and me, the big shot Jewish director, which I used in a speech for Miles, I'm the schmuck who's not giving presents. Well, it all fell apart. And Gary and I wrote this episode based on that. And we went to, there's a drugstore called Dana Drugs in Burbank, half a mile from Warner Brothers. And we went there and we walked around the tchotchke aisle, and we just picked out the stupidest things that you could find, and things like 2 country boys peeing in a pond, which was, I think, the thing that Corky bought for Jim, or Jim bought. Anyway, we found this Yadro stuff and these stupid things which we imagine could be the last things on a shelf. And we wrote this episode And it was one. The table reading was great. Everything went great. Then during the week, for some reason, there was a certain point where the script just seemed to lose momentum, and we couldn't figure out what it was. And Diane took the script and she went into her office and she wrote a little scene that is Murphy and Jim getting on the elevator together, and it's a little back and forth between the two of them. And I don't know how she knew. This is one of Diane's many gifts. But that connective tissue, that scene somehow bridged a gap in the script. But her edition of that, I don't know, it's a page and a half or something, but it lifted the rest of the script back up to what we had heard on Monday. And it played like a house of fire on Friday night in front of the audience. And it wound up winning us the Emmy. Which was great. And then we tried desperately with Come Out, Come Out. We wanted to win Grant Shaw an Emmy. We loved Grant so much. We loved writing for him, and we wrote that episode specifically in the hopes that maybe it could be an Emmy thing for him. And we were always disappointed that we weren't able to do that for him because I love that whole cast, but Grant. I always looked at Grant, and Grant is 10 years younger than me. And Grant and I, if I was the same, Grant auditioned for the same roles I used to audition for. He's cuter than I am, but we had a very similar quality. And I loved writing. I loved writing for all of them, but I enjoyed writing for Grant.
So I hope maybe you'll indulge me for a moment. Could you talk a little bit about the development of Jerry Gold, if you can remember, or anything that... because you wrote a lot of his episodes.
Jerry, I think the idea came, I think, from Diane, or maybe Corby, but the idea of, there were so many of these shock jocks around. Howard Stern was obviously a model, but Jerry was much more political. And so he had a little bit of Howard Stern shock jock in him, and he had a little bit more of the Rush Limbaugh thing in him. But he was a provocateur. And again, because the show was obviously liberal in its outlook, and we tended, Republicans were easier. They were easier to attack. They were easier to make fun of. Although God knows we did have some fun with the Democrats, but it was great to have somebody who could punch back at Murphy. It was a really, and so all of us loved the idea of that. And he also had a radio show of his own, and he had a lot of these characteristics. And so, as actors, Gary and I love when we hear a voice, when we know who we're writing for, and you've got that voice. It's so much fun because we would just play this guy. We would just play Jerry, and he was such a wonderful actor and so much fun to have on set, and and he was ballsy. He was ballsy in a way that Candace really enjoyed. And so the chemistry between the two of them was so much fun. And to write for him was such a joy because he another of those times where whatever you wrote for him, you knew he was going to nail. And we just had a blast writing for him, and also the reaction of everybody else in the cast to him. Miles's protective, jealous reaction was always so much fun. I don't remember. I don't remember many lines that I wrote, but one line that I know I wrote, which I always loved, was when at one point he comes in and he basically says to Jerry, basically stick to your own kind. One of your and Jerry says, "I'm sorry, Miles, but the role of Maria has already been cast."
That whole scene is really funny. I think there's one point, I think Jim is trying to figure out if they're sleeping in the same bed. And he keeps sort of hinting, and Jerry just makes like a game show reference.
There's just something about, and I've said this in other episodes, I have a very special love of Jim. Something about the way he tries to deal with Jerry in general
yes.
is so familiar to me of the men in northwestern Minnesota that I grew up with, and this attempt to try and stay distant and detached, but also this intense need to be invested in what is happening to Murphy. And I love watching him work with him.
Charlie was so wonderful in that role. And again, talk about the insecurity of an actor. Charlie was terrified the whole first year that he was going to be fired. He didn't know how good he was. And we loved, one of the things that I always remember Diane saying is, when you're writing a script, I should be able to cover the name and know who's saying this.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot on the show.
Yeah.
Especially Jim's lines.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there were certain expositional lines that you got to get across that, and 3 or 4 people in the scene could say. But most of the time, when you write that speech, that line, whatever it is, it's got to sound like that person. And that was one of her big, big things. And I loved Jim's voice. I loved all these voices. They were so specific. Frank Fontana was every insecurity that Gary had in a way. Grant was tremendously his character was tremendously insecure. As a matter of fact, when we started working on the show, I remember saying to Gary after like episode 5, Jesus Christ, how are we going to keep this thing going? She's rich, she's beautiful, she's successful, she's respected. Where are the problems? And then we began to realize the problems are all ego problems.
Oh, yeah.
All these characters, no matter how successful they are, have tremendously insecure egos and frustrations. And Charlie, I got his voice for some reason. I loved writing Charlie. And I remember, again, one of the few lines that I remember early on, we had a speech for Charlie that we were looking for the introduction to this speech. It was a reminiscence. And I for some reason came up with the line, "It was cold at the Yalu River, damn cold.
Set me free.
Yep, set me free."
We just covered that.
And whenever I was trying to get into Charlie's voice, that was the line I always started with in my head. He was he was the man of honor. He was the old school, the trench coat guy, the guy who had been with Edward R. Murrow in World War II, even though the math didn't work out. That was how he saw himself. He was the old school guy. He was an honorable man. He was a man who viewed women, in a certain chivalrous way. And I loved how he called her slugger.
Oh, yeah. That's my favorite.
And he was absolutely a joy to write for. They all were. I loved writing for all those people.
I was just I'm assuming you can't talk about anything coming up with the reboot.
I can't talk, but it's easy because I honestly don't know. The deals are apparently being worked out as we speak, and I just. I'm looking forward to it. It was a wonderful ride to go on in the first place, and we were there for 6 years and 150 episodes, Gary and I. And I look forward to being able to do it again and enjoy it, because I used to drive to work every day thinking, I'm not smart enough to write this show. I'm not funny enough to write this show. Oh my God, she's got to come out of that elevator again. What is she going to say? Why doesn't she take the stairs? It was a show that I never was able to enjoy while I was doing it. It took me a long time to get to the point where I could be in the middle of production and just sort of enjoy the ride. And know that it's a talented group of actors, it's a talented group of writers. We'll figure it out. I did drive to work terrified all the time, and I'm looking forward to being able to get together with those people now, knowing those voices as well as we all do, and get a chance, as you guys were talking about before, to explore their take on what's happening right now.
Yeah, then you can be significantly less terrified this time.
It would be very nice. It would be very nice because it's very interesting. I'm writing a little bit now with my son, who has decided he wants to be a writer and is unfortunately talented enough so that I couldn't tell him, don't do this. And I'm trying to instill in him a little bit more of that sense. He seems to have it a little more than I did, that feeling of, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. You're in a corner. You can write your way out of it. They always got written. They always got on the air. We never had to put up a sign saying, sorry, we couldn't figure this week's episode out. So, everybody talk amongst yourselves and we'll be back next week. They always get written.
That's the nature of the business.
Yeah. I mean, even doing this small little podcast, because it's so quick, you have to kind of go, you know what? It's going to be what it's going to be, and
this is
move
how
on to
we're
the next
feeling
week.
today.
Yeah.
Well, I love the fact I am also a firm believer that if you do things because you love doing them, that's the best way. And the fact that the show resonated for you too in this way. I'll tell you one more story about the impact of the show and the things that surprise you. About 4 years ago, my son was in his junior year of college. We went back to his high school for a fundraiser, and one of the fundraising items up for auction was a baseball tour. My son and I both love baseball, so I bid on and I won this tour of 4 East Coast baseball stadiums with this group, and it was a blast. We went back, and my son was now old enough to go and buy the beer, which was very cool. We saw games in Washington at the new ballpark in Washington. We saw a game at Camden Yard in Baltimore, and we saw a game in New York at the new Yankee Stadium, and it ended up with a day at Cooperstown, and then in Boston at Fenway Park, where I had been to games when I was in school. And we saw a great game at Fenway. It was a beautiful summer night. And at the end of the game, my son had a buddy from high school who was at Tufts and was in Boston for the summer working. I said, call him up. It's like 9:45 in Boston, and I'll take him out to a late dinner. So he called up his friend Connor, and Connor met us at a sports bar just outside Fenway Park on Yawkey Avenue or Yawkey Street, whatever it is. And we're sitting there, and it's a beautiful night, and we've seen a great game, and we're watching the Dodger game because it's 7:00 in LA. We're watching the Dodger game on the TV, and our wait person comes up, a young woman comes up and says, hi, my name's Avery, and I'll be your wait person. And I said, Avery, that is a very unusual name. Is it a family name? And she said, no, it's a name that my mom always loved. And I said, was your mom a fan? Were you named after the baby on Murphy Brown? And she said, oh my God, how did you know that? And my son said, oh, you have no idea how happy you've made my father. So I wound her talking to her. She went and got her cell phone and called her mother, and I talked to her mom on the phone. When you have a show in which you create, you're involved with it has characters that people name their children after. There were a lot of girls given the name Murphy. There were a few babies named Avery. But when you realize a show has had the kind of impact that one had, it's such a. It feels like I feel incredibly fortunate, and then at a very late part of my career, doing Hannah Montana, I felt like at the beginning of the career and at the tail end of the career, I worked with incredibly talented, beautiful women who became role models in their own way for huge groups of young women. And to have been involved in cultural moments like those for a kid from Milwaukee, who used to watch The Tonight Show and think, oh God, I want to get out there. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I want to get there. It's been really remarkable.
Well, for me, and we sort of talked about before of, people who looked forward to Mondays. Mm-hmm. For me, it was because I was bullied a lot. And so here was something where I could laugh and I could enjoy. But doing the podcast and sort of looking back at sort of, childhood me, I'm realizing that subconsciously it was because there was this strong woman. Yes, she was funny and it made me happy because it was a funny show. But I think subconsciously I saw someone who could stand up to bullies, something that I wasn't able to do at the time, or at least I would try and it didn't work. And I don't know why that hadn't dawned on me. I mean, I knew that she was a role model, obviously, but it was something to want to emulate as well as making, me happy at a time when I wasn't.
I come from, my mother is an incredibly strong woman. My wife is a very strong woman. I loved writing for women, frankly, more than men. I find women more interesting to write than men. But Murphy was, once we figured out, oh, she has her own insecurities and her own, and she has to, she has to navigate her way through this. You were talking earlier about dealing with being called bossy. And how do I modulate my voice or my approach to something so that I can still get my point across and so forth. Murphy was so much fun to write because we felt at a certain point we knew how to do it. We knew how to do it in a way where you could see her like a bull in a china shop, but you knew where it was coming from. She had her redeeming moments. She had her vulnerabilities. She had her passions and the things that she cared so deeply about and that were important to her. And Diane's, brilliant choices. She had the alcoholism that she battled. She had the weakness, the character flaw, the character failing that she was constantly aware of and trying to surmount. And it made it such a rich character. And when we would get scripts, sometimes every once in a while someone would send a spec script. It was always tricky to read spec Murphys because of legalities. You didn't want to read something that might be close to something you were on the show. But oftentimes the mistake that people made was they just made her angry, or they just made her loud, and we realized, oh, okay, that's what we know how to do. We know how to do that thing that shows that there's more underneath, and that she was at that time. She was wonderful. Roseanne, in her own way, was like that too, from a very different socioeconomic background too, but two strong women fighting for their families, fighting for what was important to them, it was enormous fun to be in the room with Diane and Corby, and learn from the two of them.
I think something that I'm excited to see come back, and we talked about this in I believe in an interview, was something that we saw things that we've now lost in our entertainment. We grew up expecting that some of these things could be available, and they've kind of gone away. And for example, in Roseanne, we don't see a true working class family very often anymore. You have big houses that nobody could afford, and a lot of ease of life that nobody in a situation like that could afford. And so seeing things like Roseanne coming back and Murphy coming back, one of the things that I grew up expecting out of my entertainment that Murphy provided was platonic relationships between men and women.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
How excited I am to see those kind of coming back to my screen. And Frank and Murphy are so unique and special, and they're the fact that even when they try to have a baby, they can't get past that. There's never the glimmer of the maybe. There's never the the
Right.
will they, won't they. And I appreciate that so much because it opened the door for so many more stories.
And the balance of comedy and drama, that's something that we expected and tend to watch more dramedies now because to me, the cornerstone of what I want to see on television because of Murphy Brown is that balance. And it maybe good sitcoms are shorter now because they're more commercials and so the character development and maybe some dramatic parts are taken out. But that's what always stood out for me and I guess gave me high expectations was that in this sitcom you can still have a very dramatic real moment.
Oh, no question, no question. And there are a few shows that do it. I will say, I mean, The Middle, which was created by two of our wonderful writers who worked on Murphy and came up with lines and stories that are some of my absolute favorites. But that show obviously deals with a struggling family, and there are. I've become a big fan of the show Mom. Because
Yes, that's a great example.
Emily
Yes.
Osment, who was the best friend on Hannah Montana, did a 3-show arc a year and a half ago, and I started watching the show to see her on it and fell in love with that show. And there's a show that deals really seriously with alcoholism as well as very wonderfully comedically. But in the 3-show arc that Emily did, she was a kid with an addiction who they take in, who winds up ultimately going out with a boy and overdosing and dying. So there are a few. The problem is, I think that the network has ceded a lot of that ground to cable. So network tends to go sillier and bigger
Because they'll do it on FX.
Yeah, exactly. Because the dramedy and the stuff that goes deeper goes to FX or one of the cable channels. Yeah.
Is there anything that you can think of that obviously we definitely want to have you on again.
We'd love to have you also
Yeah.
talking about a specific episode sometimes.
Oh yeah. I'm going to do my homework and rewatch because it is fun to watch them again and remember those performances and remember those nights on the set. Diane we always dressed on Friday night. We the guys all wore sport jackets and ties because it was like she came out of theater in New York, and I think there was it's opening night on Broadway.
Opening and closing, you dress.
Yeah, well, next time I'll dress. Mm-hmm. I'll put on a jacket and tie for you guys. Yeah, I think. That covers a lot of for now, and then I'll do some more homework and we can talk as you guys get deeper into the series. We can talk about specific episodes, but it's obviously this is a treat for me to. We all of us in the writing staff stay in touch. The original writing staff, we're all still close, and we often get together a couple times a year, but. Again, I haven't looked at these episodes in 25 years, so it's really fun to have an excuse to do it.
We're happy to provide that.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And that's something that we hear from all the writers that we talk to is how close you guys were, and I think that's a testament to the show.
Yes, it shows in the writing. It shows in the creation.
Well, it was also Diane and Corby picking the people that they picked.
Yeah.
And I treasure those friendships. Feel very lucky about that.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on our little podcast.
Oh, well, my treat. And we'll do it again.
Great. Thanks so much for your time.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.